All right, we talk transfers all the time. I mean, all through the offseason, we talk about transfers, the transfers that Pitt needs, the transfers that Pitt has gotten, the transfers that Pitt is after, and all those different things. We always have conversations about transfers. But now we're in the season, 3 games into the season. Let's talk a little bit more about transfers, the guys Pitt has gotten and the guys Pitt lost out on, or the guys who left Pitt in the transfer portal last offseason. How have those transfers done now that they departed the Panthers? Who would Pitt like to have the most? Who would probably help the most if they'd stuck around and stayed on the roster? And then who's contributing out of the transfers that they added? How much success did Pitt have in the transfer portal, evaluating it after the first quarter of the 2025 college football season? It's all transfer talk here on Transfer Thursday on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I feel like I'm compacted here. I'm feeling a little claustrophobic. I changed the screen format just a little bit so you can see more of the headlines up there. I'm not so sure how I feel about it. And I also like the pictures. The pictures should be a little more prominently featured. Our guy, Matt Hawley, does a great job taking photos for us, so I wanted to give it a little bit more space there, but I'm not sure how I feel about it just yet. You might tune in tomorrow, and I might be, for the mailbag, and I might be back to taking over most of the screen with my mug. But this is a little bit more like what we do on Wednesday nights when we have the live show with me and Jim, and we're split screen on that, and so it's a little bit more like that. But we'll see. We'll see how I feel about it. I know everybody wants me to get a background, but I haven't decided on that yet. I haven't decided if I'm going to do it, let alone what I would do if I did. For now, you get the back wall in my room. Anyway, it's the Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. Talking a little bit about transfers. I got the photo messed up there. You only see the top of Blue Hicks as we talk about transfers. That's Blue Hicks there. Talking about transfers today, I had a thing on Panther-Lair.com, an article yesterday, just kind of running down all the guys who left Pitt and, where they went, how they've been doing, how their season has gone so far. And I think it's probably, it's funny. It's one of those articles that we write or like research that we do that's mostly just interesting. I tend to think of it as being interesting. I find it interesting. I'm just like, how are those guys doing? I mean, they're players who Pitt recruited. We followed them through the recruiting process. They got to Pitt. We watched their career for whatever it consisted of during their time at Pitt. And now it's just kind of interesting to see where they go after this. Like, what are they up to? How are they doing? But there's always a lot that gets sort of taken away from that. And I think it's are they playing at a Power 4 conference school, or are they playing at a lower level? Did they transfer in a lateral move, or did they transfer down? And at their new school, how are they doing? Is it turning out that maybe some of these guys Pitt recruited are not Power 4 level players, or maybe not even FBS level players? There are some guys who transferred to the FCS level, some guys who transferred to the D2 level. Some are having success at the FCS level, and some aren't playing at the FCS level, or not playing at the Group of 5 level, or wherever they might have transferred. And I think, and I would say this just because, as we go through general terms before we get into some of the more specific things, I would say that, we've run these kind of articles for the past few years. Like every week during the season, we've run these transfer tracker articles at Panther-Lair.com, just kind of recapping where guys went and how they've been doing. And sometimes people will take, the conclusion will be, look at that, Pitt recruited players that weren't good enough because now they've gone to Group of 5 programs, FCS programs, D2 programs, whatever it might be, and they're still not even excelling there. So or they're finally finding a place where they can excel, and they had to transfer down to the FCS ranks. And some people will extrapolate that that's an indictment on Pitt recruiting, that Pitt didn't recruit good enough players, and as evidenced by the fact that they can't hack it at the FBS level or the Power Conference level. I guess my response to that would be, this happens everywhere. I think it speaks more to the uncertainty and unpredictability of the recruiting process in general than it does to Pitt's recruiting tactics or approach or success or lack thereof. Just because Pitt recruits a guy and he ends up transferring to a D2 school or a 1AA school, an FCS school, and maybe he isn't playing, or transfers to Toledo and he's not playing, or whatever it might be, just to go to the Group of 5 level, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was maybe it means it was a failure on Pitt recruiting, but I think by and large, the recruiting process is something of a crapshoot for all but the most elite level guys at the top. There are very few guaranteed, recruits in any given class. And even the ones, sometimes some of the guys who seem like guaranteed sure things don't pan out and don't play and don't make it, because there's so much that goes into whether or not you're a successful college football player, college basketball player, college student athlete, right? There's so much that goes into it. It's not just those physical skills that you showed in high school, but it's, how you transfer and not transfer, changing schools, but how you adapt to the new environment of being in college, not just in a college sports program, but in just being a college student. I often say that, look, there are plenty of non-student athletes who struggle with the transition to college. It can be tough. It's a whole new world, and it can a whole new world of freedoms that you didn't have in high school, and how you handle those goes a long way in determining your level of success. And that's for anyone. Not just, and then you throw in the added element of being a student athlete, and mastering college offenses and college defenses and balancing the schedule and getting the work in and taking it seriously enough when you're on your own for the first time. Those are things that are really tough to predict in the recruiting process. And I'm off on a tangent here, but I think it's important to remember every now and then when we talk about busts. And this guy was a bust. This guy was no good. Or, they misevaluate. And there are times where there are misevaluations. There are times when a coaching staff looks at a kid and says he can play, and he really can't. That happens. There are times when coaching staffs get caught up in stars and high-rated guys and whatever else it might be, and it doesn't work out. There are busts like that. But a lot of times, I think it's just, they just didn't put in the work when they got to college. They just didn't adapt to that new sort of lifestyle and transition to it well. And so that's why you end up seeing some of the things that we see sometimes, when we look at how guys are doing at their new schools after they transfer. I think you could look at a few guys who transferred this past offseason who haven't seen the field yet. Terrence Moore at Toledo, or Noah Bigelow at Louisiana Tech, or Nate Yarnell at Texas State. A couple of the linemen, Abaraya and Schmoranzer, transferred. Adham Abaraya went to Eastern Michigan, and Maurice Schmoranzer went to Appalachian State. They haven't played. Were they misses in recruiting? Maybe. I don't know. Terrence Moore and Nate Yarnell played a decent amount at Pitt. Or is it just a matter of, that's how it goes sometimes, right? I don't know if it's necessarily an indictment on Pitt. But some of the more notable guys who did leave Pitt this past offseason and maybe are having some success, or maybe not, but Chief Borders, who transferred to Pitt from Nebraska, spent a year with the Panthers, is now at UNLV. He started every game this season, and he's got 9 pressures so far. It's team best, according to Pro Football Focus. So he seems to be doing well. Sincere Edwards, I think, is one of the guys that Pitt coaches and fans would put on the very short list of players you didn't want to lose. He went to UCF. He has not started in the first 2 games for Central Florida, but he's got 7 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, and 2 pressures. As a reserve defensive end, he's going to play against North Carolina this Saturday, so that'll be an interesting one to watch. Rodney Hammond is Sacramento State's second leading rusher, for whatever that's worth, behind another transfer, Colorado State transfer Damian Henderson. Obviously, Brendan Marion, the former Pitt receivers coach, who's now the head coach at Sacramento State, bringing in a lot of transfers, trying to hit the ground running there. Nakai Johnson has been a starting defensive tackle at Tulsa. Not very productive in that role so far at Tulsa, but he's starting and he's playing a lot, so that's good to see. David Ojebwe has 6 pressures this season for Norfolk State. That's a guy who was rated a 4-star prospect, went to Clemson, transferred to Pitt, never really made an impact, and now he dropped down a level. He's playing at Norfolk State. Ty Diefenbach, the quarterback, is in kind of a weird quarterback rotation at Cal Poly, but he is their leading passer, leading rusher even. He's thrown for 5 touchdowns and 1 interception. He's completing 68% of his passes. I don't know if he was ever going to play at Pitt or at the in the ACC, a Power 4 level, but he seems to have found a good home for himself, and he's having some success there. Ditto for Tamarian Crumpley, who transferred to UAB, the cornerback. He started all 3 games this year. He's got 8 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and a handful of pass breakups. So he's doing well in that role. And There's someone else. Oh, Jaden Bradley from a few years ago is at UNLV also. He's out there. I think, who else did I mention? Chief Borders. Oh, and Dejon Reynolds is. All three of those guys are at UNLV. Reynolds has 3 catches for 53 yards this season. But Bradley is actually UNLV's leading receiver. He's got 13 catches, 262 yards, and a touchdown in 3 games. So he's doing a nice job out there. He was always a talented player, but that was one of those guys that, how well did he transition to college in all the ways that you transition to college? Of course, one of the other guys who's, been a standout so far this season, a former Pitt player who transferred, my guy, Bengali Kamara. He's at Kansas now. He was at South Carolina last year. He's at Kansas now. He started the season opener, but then he suffered a non-contact injury in practice, missed the next game, was ruled out for the game. Actually, he didn't miss a game. He was ruled out for the game against Missouri in week 2, but ended up working through the injury and got himself cleared and played and had 9 tackles and 2 tackles for loss against Missouri. They're going to play West Virginia, Kansas is, on Saturday night. So if you want to tune into, there's no Pitt football on Saturday. You want to watch something on Saturday night, maybe look for Kansas, West Virginia, see if West Virginia can keep up its success that they had against Pitt, at least in terms of getting a win, and then maybe see if Bengali Kamara does how he does in the backyard brawl. A handful of other guys are, making plays out there. One notable guy, I guess, Israel Polk, the wide receiver who transferred to Akron 2 years ago. He has started the last couple of games against Akron. They played UAB on Saturday. He caught 4 passes for 99 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's the only receiver at Akron to have a touchdown catch this year. He's tied for, he leads Akron in receiving yards with 116. Doing a nice job. Didn't really fit in Pitt's offense or offensive system and didn't really seem to fit at Pitt at all, but he seems to be off to a nice start at Akron this year. In terms of guys that Pitt would probably want to have back, other than Sincere Edwards, I think Panther-Lair has often made the claim that there weren't that many guys they wanted back anyway. They held on to the guys they wanted to hold on to. I think Panther-Lair could lose Darrelle Revis to the transfer portal and say he held on to all the guys he wanted to hold on to. I don't mean like Darrelle Revis now when he's like 35 years old or whatever. I'm talking about like prime Darrelle Revis, 2006 Darrelle Revis, could go to the transfer portal and Panther-Lair would say, well, we held on to the guys we wanted to hold on to. That's just par for the course, I think there probably would be only a very small handful of guys Panther-Lair would say over the years he wanted to keep or wanted to hold on to who he lost to the transfer portal. But I think if there was one guy that Pitt would really benefit from having on the roster this year, who left in the transfer portal last offseason, in my opinion, it's Jordan Bass. Now, Jordan Bass spent all of last year playing behind Kyle Lewis, and quite frankly, he was never going to get ahead of Kyle Lewis at that star linebacker position. Probably wasn't going to be able to move over to the money linebacker and play ahead of Rasheem Biles either, because he didn't last year. He was like the 5th linebacker last year. If you assume Key Thompson to be, number 4, it was Bass and Braylon Lovelace as like 5 and 6. They were firmly reserves. And they probably, particularly for Bass, who's an outside linebacker, he wasn't going to move ahead of Kyle Lewis or Rasheem Biles. And so I understand why he went into the transfer portal. He transferred to Virginia Tech and is playing like a hybrid strong safety outside linebacker position, like a 3-3-5 type of defense. It's listed as a safety, but that's where he's playing. But I think Pitt could have really used him this year. And I say that retrospectively. I was disappointed to see him go because I think he's a really talented football player. I think he has a chance to be really good. And he's a big athlete and fits well in Pitt's defense. So I thought that was too bad that he left. Unfortunate to see him go, although I understood it. But if we look at it in light of events that have happened over the past 6 months, really over the past 2 months, Jordan Bass would be a crucially important part of this team, I think, this year. When you consider the linebacker injuries. When we talked yesterday about the defense, one of the biggest problems for this defense right now is the linebacker depth. And I think Cam Lindsey is going to be really, really good. But right now, he is basically the extent of the linebacker depth. And, when you have to go to him, that means Kyle Lewis got hurt. And that's not a good thing, right? And that's not a knock on Cam Lindsey. It's just that Kyle Lewis is that important to the defense, and he's that good. If Jordan Bass had stayed on this team, then you'd have a little bit more veteran usable depth. Because even compared to Jaden Bonsu, the transfer from Ohio State who got hurt, who was going to be, the top reserve behind Kyle Lewis. I mean, Jordan Bass had a lot more experience on the field than Bonsu because Bonsu never played at Ohio State. And so Bass would have helped them considerably this year. Particularly, I think even before Bonsu got hurt, and then definitely in light of Bonsu's injury, Bass would have played a lot and would have been pretty important. I don't think there are too many other guys that they're like desperately missing now. They lost the two corners, Rylan Gandy and Noah Bigelow. And we'll see how some of these guys hold up when they play more pass heavy offenses or offenses that have the passing game as a strength. We'll see how some of these corners hold up. Maybe Gandy could have been useful or Bigelow. But ultimately, I think they've done okay with their corners this year. They just really could use some more linebacker depth, and Jordan Bass's transfer hurts in that way. What about the guys Pitt has brought in? Real quick kind of review there of what Pitt has gotten so far this season. They brought in 16 transfers this offseason between the winter window and the spring window. Two of those guys left before the season even started. Andy Jean left after spring camp. James London left at the end of training camp when Trey Bukowski was named the starter. So that cuts the number down to 14. Two of the other transfers, like I mentioned, Jaden Bonsu and Jaden Moore, must be something about that name. They're both injured. Bonsu's out for the season. Moore is still, according to Pat Narduzzi, on track to return at some point, but he hasn't played all year this year. So that takes him down to 12 guys. You look at the 12 transfers, who either didn't retransfer and aren't hurt. They've gotten 5 starters out of that group. 5 guys who started the West Virginia game and are pretty locked into starting roles. Jeff Percy, Keith Cuvea, Blaine Spires, Blue Hicks, and then Justin Holmes. With Jake Overman injured, Justin Holmes has been a starting tight end. So you got 5 starters out of the transfer group and then 6 top reserves. Deuce Spann is like the number 4 wide receiver right now. He's number 4 in terms of snaps. He's number 4 in terms of how he's playing and how he's being used. So he's right up there, I think, at a top reserve role. Kendall Stanley is in a top reserve role. He's basically the backup at sort of feels like every position. Certainly both tackle spots and probably both guard spots. He would be the guy who goes in, although I think Jackson Brown might have come in for B.J. Williams in the West Virginia game, I think. The double check on that. But Kendall Stanley is a top reserve offensive lineman. He's the number 6 offensive lineman right now. Rashawn Murray has found himself, he got a lot of playing time against West Virginia. The Cal PA transfer, he had 2 pass interference penalties and also a good pass breakup. So those 2 might outweigh the one. Joey Zielinski has been, I think, the 4th defensive end behind Spires and Jimmy Scott and Zach Crothers. But he's also got 19 pass rush snaps and 5 pressures, which is a pretty high success rate. If you're getting 1 out of every 4 pass rushes, you are getting pressure on the quarterback. That's pretty good. Be interested to see what could develop there. Obviously, he's getting a little bit more of an opportunity maybe as the number 4 D end with Jaden Moore out. If Moore was there, I don't know how that depth chart might order itself. But Zielinski's he's a 2-deep defensive end. Ditto for Kavir Baines-Marquez. He's a 2-deep safety. He's the top guy to come in with the Delta defensive package. He's a top reserve safety at the field safety position. Cole Gonzalez is the backup quarterback. So you got 6 reserves and 5 starters out of the 12 transfers who either didn't retransfer or get hurt. Of your available 12 transfers, 11 of them are either starters or top reserves. So I think you're getting good contributions. The one exception would be Zion Ferguson, who's transferred from North Carolina. I think they brought him in as a long-term cornerback, prospect, basically. And I don't think they brought him in expecting him to contribute this year. Although he did get on the field the Duquesne game at least, maybe the Central Michigan game. I forget if he got out there, but he was definitely out there for the Duquesne game. So I think that's a pretty good hit rate. I think Pitt is a team that's always going to try to build itself mostly through recruiting. But if you can get, 5 starters and 6 top reserves out of 12 available transfers, I think you did pretty well in terms of finding immediate help, getting guys who can come in and play right away. And then, of course, that doesn't count the guys who transferred last year. Other starters like Eli Holstein, Desmond Reed, Raphael Williams, Lyndon Cooper, just on the offensive side. Jake Overman, if he was out there. Defensively, well, I guess defensively, Jimmy Scott, recruited guy. Sean Fitzsimmons and Francis Brew seem like your starting tackles. They're both recruited guys. Biles, Lovelace, and Lewis are all recruited guys. Rashad Battle was, even if, so I guess at West Virginia, they started Shadarian Harrison and Sean Lee. So both of your starting corners were recruits. And then your safeties, Cruz Brookins and Javon McIntyre, were recruits. So definitely more transfers needed on offense. There's no question about that. They've needed to go to the transfer portal more on offense, which says a whole lot about a whole lot. And probably it says a whole lot about things that we've talked about many times. But anyway, that's the latest on transfers. Guys who came in, guys who left, how they're all doing. Now you're all up to speed. Don't forget, we got the Morning Pitt mailbag tomorrow, so make sure you get your questions in at Panther-Lair.com. We can answer as many as we can in the mailbag. I always look forward to that, and hopefully you do as well. I'll see what I think about this screen setup. I don't know. Like I say, I feel kind of claustrophobic, sort of boxed in over here. Anyway, make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks for watching the video today. Enjoy your Thursday. We'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.